Hello, I'm Lisa Campion, and this is the Miracle of Healing on Empower Radio, where we come together to discuss all kinds of healing, and that's something the world needs a lot of these days. If you're new to my show, then welcome. And if you've been on the journey with us for a while, then welcome back. Today we've got a super fun guest. I always love talking to other psychics. It's one of my favorite topics. But like a, I'm wondering what it would feel like for you if you knew how to expand your spiritual bandwidth. That's what we're going to talk about today as we talk with acclaimed psychic and spiritual guide Charley Castex. And he takes us on this deep dive of sort of what he calls DIY soulcraft. I love that. And he's going to share with us some of his strategies for becoming empowered and staying empowered and kind of like living in the purest and highest vibration that we can do. And staying human with a lot of humor, which he has a lot of. So he's amazing. He's really been around for, working at a very high level since 1995. That's kind of amazing. And he's been on the New York Times, HuffPost, ABC, NBC News, and he's guided tens of thousands of people across 6 continents, pairing his intuitive gifts and his passion for empowering and coaching others to realize their spiritual potential. So welcome to the show. Thanks so much for being here, Charley.
Thanks, Lisa. My pleasure. It's great to be here and sharing conversation with you.
Yeah, like I said, I always love talking to other psychics, and I'm wondering if you don't mind sharing a little bit about how you came to that work. Like, how did you know you had gifts, and when did you start the work?
Okay, so absolutely, but there are 2 different stories. When I came to the work, it in many ways chose me, and I'm sure that probably sounds familiar for you, Lisa.
Yeah.
But I really aspired to be a good tarot reader. When I was in my teens and started venturing into tarot, and I was so fascinated with it. And at that time, there were only maybe 10 or 12 books on tarot that were kind of universally available. And so essentially I put them all in a blender and just took notes and studied, and I was aspiring to be good at reading. I didn't really have a sense that I would end up being a psychic or have the psychic component. I just approached it from an academic perspective. But I found when I started venturing readings for friends or, my partner's daughter, etc., the next thing I know, I was able to describe the room, and there was a remote viewing aspect, and I wasn't even sure what that was at the time. So, or I'd see a real estate sign, and the person I'd say, "Wait a minute, are you about to sell your house?" And they'd say, "Yeah, which card is that?" And I'd say, "Oh, I don't know, that's not in the cards, but I'm seeing it in my mind." So there were aspects that just sort of caught up with me like that. I really was just, I didn't have the grandiose idea to, I'm going to be a psychic. But I fell in love with the journey and fell in love with the path of service after I'd come to it from a more academic perspective.
That's super cool. So we have that in common. I started with the Rider-Waite deck when somebody gave me a copy of the Rider-Waite when I was 16, and I started studying back then. That was a long time ago, and I've been, like you, was really entranced with it, and I still teach it these days. It's part of my repertoire for sure. Great. So thank you. I love hearing that story. And let's talk about your book, Expand Your Spiritual Bandwidth. It's really like this recipe book, really. That's how it struck me, is kind of this this bringing together of this spiritual wisdom, human wisdom, psychic wisdom, all of these threads that you're pulling together to help people live what felt like to me like a super high frequency life. Is that what it was like for tell me what it was like for you, or what brought you to write it?
Beautiful. Well, first of all, thank you. That's really those are wonderful words, and appreciate the graciousness in that description. What brought me to write Expand Your Spiritual Bandwidth was inspiration and living within the path for so many years, and teaching and instructing other people on these concepts. And I found that now, as you suggested in the beginning of our session, our interview today, more than ever, people are needing a sense of clarity and coherence, and absolutely they need more empowerment. So I had other plans to write a different type of book, but it came to me that now is really a time that people are very thirsty for an understanding of how to go about, how to. So that's where the DIY soulcraft idea fleshed itself out. So essentially, Expand Your Spiritual Bandwidth is a series of strategies that empower by syncing the spirit, mind, and body. And I've done my best to have it as thorough as could be within a relatively small context. But yeah, I was inspired through the daily experience of people where I'd be helping them with one aspect or another in terms of their own clarity and their own empowerment. And they'd say, okay, well, how do I do it? Well, what should I do? So yeah, it took a concerted effort at trying to crystallize some of these concepts that really are be interesting to see your take on it. But I think many of them are somewhat familiar and instinctual. For instance, Minding the Store is the kind of opening chapter that references the neuroscience concept that would be called metacognition, which is the fancy word for understanding that we can track the arc of our thoughts and we can follow that trajectory and be very conscious of what we're thinking about. So basically mindfulness, but then how do we capitalize upon that mindfulness is where some of the subsequent strategies go to, from the compassion reflex and all the way through. So it's been quite a journey, and I love that people are receiving support and feeling a little closer to their bliss, from following up on these strategies.
Well, I like that you take these sort of high level concepts. We all know we need to do mindfulness. We all know we need to, eat right and have a harmonious environment and have integrity inside of our own selves in all the ways that we can. But you kind of break it down into some ideas that are more tangible. I felt like this is actually how you do it. And I thought that was really I thought that was really useful. And there's something beautiful, I think, about your work that's calling us to a higher, what I mean, that higher vibration, like the idea that we can choose our thoughts. We can be empowered to choose our thoughts, to choose our feelings, which a lot of people don't know they can do.
Exactly. Beautifully said. Beautifully said. Yeah, absolutely. We're in the driver's seat. And again, instinctually, I think we have a sense that we're creators of our lives, but we oftentimes have to disinvest ourselves of a lot of conditioning and a lot of erroneous beliefs, and have a little bit more self-love and a little bit more investment into ourselves as individuals and explore that possibility, and really just be a certain measure of self-love, I think, is requisite just to get on with the journey of empowerment, to be interested enough to invest in ourselves. So, it's an absolutely beautiful, beautiful journey for people. And it does start with awareness, because I'm a firm believer that we can't solve problems we're not aware of. I'm also a firm believer that we can't simultaneously champion and abuse ourselves. So that's where I get into sacred selfishness and elevating the ego and some of these concepts that maybe at first glance seem a little bit, like I state in the book, a counterintuitive kick in the keister to say, what do you mean by elevating the ego? So it's not to be contrarian or anything, but I think half of the joy is to lighten ourselves up. And I love your reference to increasing our frequency. Now that's understood with quantum models and the emerging sciences, that it's not really a woo-woo principle. It's a very actual fact that we, our bodies certainly are an extension of an electromagnetic field. And the health of that field is based in how robust it is, and the speed in which it's vibrating is its relative frequency. And this bears out in a life that is very satisfying and fulfilled, rather than just living within our psychological framework and often running really fast in any direction. So it's nice to turn the focus within and reacting, right?
Yeah, like that. There's sort of that place where we're just reacting. We're not thinking. We're not choosing. And I felt like a lot of the frame behind your work is like, well, when you're choosing positivity, there's no room for negativity. Or if you're choosing to take like a more loving view, a higher view of yourself, other people, then we sort of edge out the negativity by continuing to choose positivity.
Right. And isn't that remarkable how simple that is?
Yes.
In some sense? It is.
Yes.
I think oftentimes people are a little bit skittish about claiming their power because they have an intuitive sense that there's responsibility that's attached to that power. Mm-hmm. So the responsibility is saying, well, we have to choose. I mean, do you really want to romance your suffering? A lot of people, unfortunately, have just sort of a default to worshiping and it almost like fetishizing their suffering as if it's a prized Porsche or something. You know, they're just polishing and loving on their suffering. And not to minimize the reality of existential suffering in any way or to belittle the emotions that are dramatic for us as humans. But the central point is we get to choose our existence and we get to choose where we place our attention. And the quality and character of those thoughts is really the origin of the feelings because the thoughts are the causal aspect. The feelings are an effect. And we often see that in reverse. Wow, this feeling happened. It must be random. It must be caused by something out there or someone or other something. Not really. Not really. It's, other people's behaviors and actions can stimulate the emotion and energy that you have and they provoke what's underneath the surface, but you get to decide how you're being and how you are, right? So,
there's like a little spiritual growing up necessary for that. It's like a maturity process of like really owning all of us, owning all of the that we're fully responsible for all the various parts of ourselves. And I think you do it with sort of a, I wouldn't say tough love because that's not the right really feeling I felt, but more like kind of an insistence on that. Like it's like we got to start with that and we can't can't slide away from that. You know, and we can do with a lot of love, a lot of awareness, a lot of compassion for ourselves. You know, but there's kind of like a little bit of holding our feet to the fire in a way for the cause and effect that happens when we really own all of it.
Right. I agree. Yeah, because the accountability, let's think about it. You know, authenticity is something that we most deeply value in our human connections, right? So why would we deny that absolutely colossal potential for ourselves, for our own relationship with ourselves? And once there's an incongruency, once there's some basis of BS with ourselves, well, then all bets are off. So that aspect of being our own best friend and really meaning it, absolutely. I think that our bodies understand when we mean business, and the body, mind, spirit really knows when we mean business, and it thankfully doesn't settle for less. You know, it really demands it. So, absolutely, growing in our power means growing up.
Mm-hmm. I liked it. I thought it was really and that there could be an edge to it, I suppose, but you're so funny that it's that it doesn't, you know, it takes a little bit of the potential sting out of it, I guess, because I thought it was so funny. So tell how humor, like how does humor loop into it for you?
Wow. Well, first of all, humor has always been really at the core of my heart. And yet it's only in recent times, for instance, in the second revision of Expand Your Spiritual Bandwidth, that it was somewhat of my own initiation to say, okay, this is good, but you need to be in it. You know, I need to be in it. So it can't just be some philosophical, high-minded takeaway. And I love words. I love verbiage. Hopefully that's evident in the book. And hopefully it's not overtly verbose either. But for me, I just had this relative epiphany with myself that if I were to do this, that I might as well allow the humor to come out in the best possible way, right? So I took a risk with that because it's interesting, as I mentioned to you when we had connected a couple of months ago, when we talked for a second, that the spiritual genres of books generally are a little wee bit dry, you know, and I love them. And I think there's so much happening there that is absolutely revelatory. But it wasn't so much a conscious decision as to inject humor, so much as life and guidance itself was saying, that's good. But if you put yourself into it and dare for it to be funny and the cosmic is largely comic, I like to say.
I agree.
Yeah, then maybe people could really receive more. Yeah, thanks. Yeah.
I think
So
like
that's
God
what I
has to
did.
have God has to have a sense of humor. It's the only explanation for
Right,
the
right.
whole world.
Right. You got it. Yeah. So I took a big risk because I certainly didn't want to offend anybody. But so far, people have been very complimentary and gracious, saying, "Oh, that's so great that you put it in there." So, the long story is I had to do a second revision, and once I did, that's when I could live with it. Now I'm like, this is something that I like, and I'm a bit of a perfectionist, so I'm like, oh, this book is good. I hope other people like it. But at least I expressed the humor in it, which I think has been refreshing for people.
That's great. So let's talk about the psychic stuff a little bit. And I found your take on it, on psychic intuition, how we run it, how we do it, how we increase it, all really great. Are there a few tips, tricks? Like where can we start if we're wanting to strengthen our psychic or really open it?
Okay, that's a good one. Well, for me, I believe that it's so fundamental for anybody that's embarking on this beautiful journey of intuition is to realize that the act of receiving guidance begins with listening for it. Mm-hmm. So oftentimes we're really kind of running past our guidance, and we often have, the two main challenges seem to be doubt and distraction. Okay, so I'll get to that in a second, but as far as the sense of listening for the guidance, that means, okay, actually being present without some great story in your head and not racing into the future or rummaging around in the past, I think is a great starting point. So yeah, absolutely getting into the center or the still point of the moment as best we can to be present. So speaking of those two great obstacles or challenge points with intuition, the doubt can be countered by presence, by being fully present, because I feel like there isn't any neurotic headroom left over if you're 100% listening, looking, feeling, and focusing internally.
Yeah.
Right. So it's self-regulating. And then the other aspect with distraction is equally potent, but sort of absurdly obvious, which is to focus. Mm-hmm. So you're not distracted, to be present. Yeah. So they're related phenomenons for sure. So I think the first place is just listening and not feeling like you have to figure it all out. I think that's very important too, is just accept or give what you get and get what you give. And you don't have to analyze it or subject your intuitive impressions to analysis. In fact, I think that's kind of the kryptonite for readers and intuitives such as you and I, is the reflexive default, let's say, to analysis is something that has to be dispensed with.
Absolutely, because you get a psychic insight and then you're like, well, was that real? And what did that mean? And did I really think that? And was that just the owner roses in my own head? And what if I say it wrong? Like we go down the rabbit hole of all those things of distraction and doubt, like you said. And I love that you give some exercises on focus, because I think people, in my experience, psychic's a little bit like a muscle. We have to exercise, and that those focusing exercises that you gave help, if you're doing an hour reading, you have to be able to hold your concentration on something kind of intense for a full hour, and that's something that, as readers, we have to build up to that kind of, and for me, it's kind of like this spiritual multitasking, because one part of me is like receiving the psychic information, and then the other part of me is like, dealing with, like, addressing with the actual person that's sitting in front of me, and so it's a little bit like, one of those things where you have to hold both, and focus is what, to me, like, is the key. Like, I can do as many sessions in a day as I can hold my focus.
Beautiful.
Yeah,
I absolutely relate, Lisa. absolutely relate. And something that's neat to consider, I think, is we can have a soft focus.
Yeah.
Oftentimes we get this reflection in the modern culture of like focus means white knuckling it. But not really. I think that focus can be a very soft, potent phenomenon of awareness that's just unsullied, awareness that is just situated where it is, and it's not
Right.
trying to analyze, and it's not trying to get anywhere with it.
Yeah.
So I recommend for people starting off to allow a listening process or a quieting process to enter into their day, which of course most typically is termed meditation. So some sort of meditation practice, I think, is important, because if nothing else, we're relying on brain coherence and heart coherence and being in a state of organization within our energy field and within our energy system, and also our neurobiology as well. So as you, I'm sure, read in the psychic hygiene strategy and expand your spiritual bandwidth, it's a little different than people expect. Like, okay, what throws the psychic off their course? Well, I think it's more often like a bad night's sleep and some food that's, maybe not going down so easy, or an argument. I found that irritation was the thing that seemed to be a big challenge for me for many years, until I overcame that program of irritation. Like the phone's not working, somebody's late for the appointment, the dog's barking. That for me was a beautiful gift in disguise once I overcame that stuff.
For me, it's anxiety. Like thinking about like, oh my kid's okay, or what, like, did I leave the stove on? I don't know, all those things, like,
Right.
that
Sure.
that,
Dialing.
all that, like, all the unsolved or unresolved little things that niggle, the back of my mind when I'm trying to work.
Right.
Yeah. And it just takes it's taken discipline, the kind of discipline that you talk about, spiritual discipline that you talk about in your book, to kind of be like, quiet that, zip, like, it's going to be okay. Like, and so that we can sort of show up in that receptive without an agenda kind of place that you were talking about.
Beautiful. I love that. I love that. Yeah. It's so, like dialing down the sympathetic system, or the fight and flight system, and amping up the parasympathetic is really paramount.
Yes.
So that I have a chapter in ESB called Become Inspired by Breath. It's the 5th strategy. And I think that's part of why I have that in there, is for our healers and intuitives. Often breath work can be sort of, since it's not conceptually that rich, people can just sort of overlook it. But it's profound in the experiential sense. So that's what I find, is when people have these breathwork strategies and they fuse it with a meditative process, then the dissonance that's created by anxiety, for instance, and anticipation really, really reduces to just a whisper, if at all.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I love that. And I agree. I think it's so mine's like kind of like, got like breathing, meditation, and just really like mental discipline of the mindfulness of like of choosing to put those things down, and show up in the moment best I can.
That's great. That's great.
Are you working with people? Tell us a little bit about, do you do readings, or how is it that you work with people these days?
Sure. Yes. First of all, I'm working with people all over the world. I do readings in person as much as I can. Here in North Carolina is where I'm situated, but I also read over Zoom and phone readings, kind of old school, and doing programs online here and there. Recently, I introduced an interesting feature called the Spiritual Empowerment Session, which is a little bit of like a mini opportunity for people to study these aspects from Expand Your Spiritual Bandwidth, and to get into it with me, so we can really work one-on-one. So I think of that as a beautiful opportunity to kind of marry the mentoring program that I have, where I help people intuitively and also spiritually in terms of spiritual life guidance. This gives them, it gives me an opportunity to be the personal trainer for your soul, in a sense. So it's a very sacred undertaking, and it's been really exciting to have that deep dive with people into what's most important to them. Because people are getting passionate about spirituality, and it's like, yes, because I know for me, And I love this interview particularly so far because often people will start with, oh, what's your story way back? And it's a long one, but I was a different kind of kid, I realize now, because I played with GI Joes and Matchbox cars, but I also played with my mother's holy water, and I also enacted masses in my room by myself.
Wow.
And then at 10 years old, with basically with a voice that was so strident that Winston Churchill probably would have shuddered. I said to myself when I said the Spirit out loud at 10 years old, it's time to get serious about my spiritual path. And I thought that was just normal, Wow. So here I am, a little bit over 50, and it's been quite a journey of decades. And I can truly say it feels like it's just beginning, because the transcendence and the mystical to me is just my everyday experience, my everyday life. It's totally out of the philosophical and into the experiential. And so I'm really happy to help people experience that too.
And let's help people figure out how to find you. So,
yeah,
like let's take a look at your website.
Thank
and here we have I think a copy of your website, and it's charleycastex.com. There it is. So if people want to get in touch with you, and is that where they go to buy your book, or is your book for sale on Amazon and all that?
Sure. Yeah, I have signed copies in our guidance store on the website, so people have been enjoying the signed copies, but it's also on Amazon, absolutely, yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, and we have it on Kindle version now too, so that's really
neat. Fantastic. And there it is. There's a copy of it. Really thought this was a very unique and fun and useful of all of them things, book of all those things. That it was really and inspiring. So thank you for writing it and sharing it with us today.
Thank you, Lisa.
And thanks for being here too, Charley. Thanks.
Great pleasure.
Glad we got a chance to connect. Yeah.
Fantastic.
And thank all of you guys for tuning in and sharing this beautiful energy with us today. You can find me at my website, lisacampion.com. Stop by and visit. I'd love to hang out with you too. And we're so glad that you joined us on this journey in the miracle of healing on Empower Radio.